Welcome back, everybody. This is Night Flight. I'm Judith Kwoba, and today James Bartley is back. His website is thecosmicswitchboardshow.com. Is it .com?
Thecosmicswitchboard.com.
Oh, thecosmicswitchboard.com. Sorry. And your YouTube channel is James Bartley. So he has been a guest here a couple of times, and today we are going to have a look at that video that Courtney Brown released from the Farsight Institute a couple of weeks ago. And so, James, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me back on the show, Judith. And it's a very thought-provoking video. Years ago, I read, if it's the same Courtney Brown, remote viewer allegedly trained by Ed Dames. That was one of the people I think that trained him. But what was the book called? Cosmic Voyage, something like that. But it was about Courtney's experiences as a remote viewer, right? And I thought it was a very good book. And he talked about remote viewing Mars in one of its final cataclysms that had, not final cataclysms, but one of the cataclysms that did away with a Martian civilization some time ago. And he described it as a pretty traumatic event because it was a blind remote viewing session where the subject target was like in an envelope or something. He wasn't consciously aware of what he was supposed to be remotely viewing, and it turned out to be, the end of that particular Martian civilization. So that part of that book particularly stuck with me because it just showed the fragility of civilizations, even ones I'm assuming that the Martian civilization was at least as advanced as our own, if not more so. So, and also the fact that whatever cataclysm befell Mars may have severely impacted this planet too, because we're not that far from each other. So, yeah, that's very interesting that Courtney Brown would come out with that video now. And I would agree that some of the main players are what Alex Collier refers to as the Orion group, reptilian groups, both terrestrial and also off-world, and many of them have interdimensional capabilities, these Orion and reptilian groups. And I would also agree with Courtney Brown's sentiment that the human race is in a state of thraldom. It's in a state of vassalage, cosmic vassalage, and it's been subjected to an imposed collective amnesia where it literally doesn't know its origins, its true history, its potential. So, yeah, there's a lot of food for thought we can talk about, Judith.
Yeah, exactly. And as we both said when watching that video, overall, I think this is a good message. I would agree to most of it. And then there was one thing that I said, I would not direct it at the Galactic Federation. And here's why. So I know the title says Galactic Federation of Worlds. Maybe he means something else, but the Galactic Federation that I know, that is more like the Thothian groups, what people call Thoth Enki Enlil collective. And these groups, they like to contact the males of their preferred bloodline and then infiltrate in that way. And especially in the New Age community, via that group, the Galactic Federation, a lot of spiritual healing has been compromised, meaning people are being tagged and tracked with astral implants. And so, yeah, What do you say? How do you see the Galactic Federation?
Well, any large grouping of, be it nations or star-faring civilizations, I mean, I can't consciously state with any degree of certainty what their level of security is, what their ability is to keep out any unwanted influences, right? Because a lot of these negative beings, they do have an interdimensional capability. They have the ability to be non-corporeal and flit in and out of dimensions. Also, they're adept at remotely influencing people and exerting mind control. It would be, I don't think it would be very easy to keep out all these unwanted influences. And once those archontic forces have established a foothold, and then over time, they can begin to spread their tentacles and corrupt this galactic federation or any other league over time, right? And we have to remember that their concept of time is not the same as ours. We tend to think in a linear fashion, and a lot of these beings have the ability to exist beyond or outside of linear time. So they can set things in motion and just let things play out for a while, and check in every once in a while in this, that, or the other world or star system, and depending on the level of intelligence and the state of technological, spiritual development in a given planet or a given star system, and just give some course corrections here and there. And also, some of these races, species that many regard as always being benevolent, always being good, well, there are factions within those so-called good ET races. There are groups of Nordics, which some could describe as looking very Palladian at times, right?
Mm.
And some of them seem to be in league or work with reptilians,
Oh yeah,
some of these Orion beings.
yeah.
So it's a mixed bag. This Aryan influence, it came to this planet from elsewhere. It didn't originate in Tibet or in Hyperborea or some other place. It emigrated here, if you will, from another star system, another dimension. So, long story short, any large organization is subject to infiltration, penetration, disruption. So I wouldn't throw in, my lot and hitch my wagon, so to speak, on any large organization, no matter how seemingly advanced spiritually or technologically they may be, because the potential always exists for infiltration and manipulation of some sort.
Yeah. And the Nordics are very famous for, genetic purity. And you could say eugenics. That entire idea, they worked directly with the Nazis. And I guess ultimately that idea of eugenics and genetic purity, that comes from them. I do not believe that it originates here.
I agree, and the whole concept of a caste system did not originate in the subcontinent in India somewhere. I believe that whole concept was brought here, and through genetic engineering and the ability to transfer the consciousness, essentially reincarnate into certain bloodlines, that they brought that whole concept of a caste system, slavery, vassalage here.
In the beginning of that video, we see Courtney, let's say in an altered state of consciousness. He says he is in deep meditation on Earth and has managed to contact them with his own skills as a human. So it seems to me that he felt the need to convince his audience that humans are not that far behind or underdeveloped or whatever you want to call it as they may think. Did you get that impression as well?
Yeah, like in earthly terms, we're just in need of a little bit of foreign aid, right? Foreign aid, and but ideally not from sort of galactic United Nations. The the concepts that he was putting out that were, like I said, were under control and whatnot. That is an important concept to get out, and also the notion that people in their sleep state can go out and interact with, if not the Galactic Federation, at least other federations. I know of many cases when people in full waking consciousness, or when they're, for all outward appearances, lying asleep in bed, their consciousness projects, and their higher self, call it what you will, this avatar version of themselves, winds up at a meeting essentially with these diverse group of beings. Oftentimes more than one species would be present, and in some of these instances, the humans are actually treated, or at least seemingly treated, as equals. They're not really looked down as some kind of inferior being, but that may vary from circumstance or setting to setting. An entirely different group of beings may look at the human who suddenly appears before them in their midst as like a roach or something. But I know of instances when people, in whatever state of being, found themselves with a group of, for all outward purposes, friendly, at least benign beings, and they were like treated equally, and they were not subjected to any form of coercion or mind control. So that part of his video is also true, that some people have this ability to either remotely, telepathically interact with, lack of a better term, aliens, or also at times in their uh, physical state, and also what I would call a heightened physical state, like it's their physical body, but it's undergone some kind of genetic, molecular, vibrational changes that allowed it to access into other realms and other dimensions, at least momentarily, long enough. And I think that also these beings have the ability, they've manifested this many times, to be able to, if abduction is too strong of a term, to be able to access and bring to them people like us, basically, for an audience to meet and interact with. So that part is very true. I know people that are in regular or even semi-regular or even regular contact with ETs. It's very easy for them. And this is not New Age channeling. The information that's coming to the people that I know is not this namaste, adonai, what up, dog kind of thing. It's like this: they're getting hardcore information about the Draco, the reptilian, the control system, the AI, what have you. And I would tend to believe in the validity of at least some of that information, because the people that are in telepathic contact with them that I know, they're not these new age lottie-dies. They've been around the block, and they've had multiple past parallel alien incarnations. So in a very real sense, like he said in that video presentation, that we are essentially boots on the ground, that we are the sum of all of our parts, and just that our higher dimensional ET aspects have been suppressed for so long through a variety of means, not the least of which is genetics and mind control through religion and other things.
Mm. he opens up a whole can of worms. He addresses the Orion War, and there, yeah, how can I say this? There's not a lot of in-depth material about the Orion Wars, I would say. So, but I guess the general consensus is that it started out in the Lyra system and then swept over to the Orion system. And what I found interesting was that apparently it was a miscommunication. When the Dracos arrived at one of the Lyran planets, the Lyrans wanted to get them to know a little bit better before they handed out their supplies or support for anything. And I think that's a good idea. Yeah, we do the same thing before we hand over the keys to the castle. We have to get to know a person a little bit. Yeah, so but the Dracos misunderstood that as refusal and consequently blew up 3 of their planets. So being Bila, Tekla, and Merk. And funny enough, Merk is the same word as that pharmaceutical company that we all know. So what is your take on this? How it started, why it started?
I believe that that whole concept of the Draco coming and essentially, for whatever reason, things getting out of hand and they wind up destroying the Lyran worlds, I believe there's some validity in that. And it's like I've said before, it's even shown up in animated cartoons with Thundercats and whatnot, where the very first episode, reptilians show up and they blow up the homeworld of the Thundercats, which are basically, you know, humanoid, jaguar, lion, cheetah beings, different types of big cat humanoids. And it's encoded in the genetic memory of people of seeing their world destroyed or being on their world when it was destroyed, and knowing at some deep level that the reptilians and the Draco in particular were responsible, and also what it amounted to a diaspora where the surviving Lyrans had to leave their home worlds because some of them were destroyed, and then they had to go kind of in an exodus, right, to other nearby star systems that were habitable, that were at least the civilizations living there were not either openly hostile to them, or perhaps they could find some shelter, some world or a part of a world where they can hide out, and so as not to upset the native civilizations, right? So they had to go in a form of exodus, a form of diaspora. And another thing that has come up with any kind of study or intuitive impressions about Delirans is they themselves were geneticists. They themselves were our genetic engineers par excellence. And they take credit, or they have been given credit for seeding humanoid life in many worlds, which I have no reason to doubt. So, because this humanoid form, obviously, you know, that you and I share, it didn't originate on Earth. It had to have been brought here because we're way out in the fringes of the galaxy, and it, you know, life had to come from the inner part of the galaxy and work its way outward, as far as I know, right? So eventually, life and humanity as we know it made its way out here, but there were some steps along the way. There was, the Pleiades system, the Sirius system, the Orion Wars, and I believe that the memory, the genetic memory, the ancestral memory of having their homeworlds destroyed by the reptilians, it put the lion humanoid beings, particularly the lion humanoid beings, permanently on their guard because they were always a warrior race, but they were also a warrior race of philosophers, of scientists, of genetic engineers. They didn't wage war for gratuitous purposes. They did it for either self-preservation or if there was some invading force that needed to be rooted out of a certain part of the galaxy, they would send their teams in. And so some of the Palladian groups are also very much designated as combat forces. That's another myth that's popped up with a lot of the New Agers that Palladians, as a rule, are, spiritual. They're
Yeah, blah, blah,
pacifists.
blah. Mm.
Yeah, but some of the Palladian groups that I'm familiar with, that I know about, it's their job is specifically to conduct warfare operations against the Draco, against the Orions, against the reptilians. So there's a lot of conflict throughout the cosmos, and a lot of it stems from when the Lyrans had their homeworld destroyed. They had to go into an exodus mode, go from one star system to another star system that would accept them, or at least where they can hide out for a bit, rebuild, regroup their strength, and eventually this all came into open conflict once again in the Orion Wars, which probably lasted for a million years, if not longer, in linear time, where just all this conflict raged. And I think it had to do also with because some of the people that I know in their genetic memory, in their past life memory of these events, they feel it had something to do with a giant stargate in the Orion system. And
Mm.
I was just talking to somebody about that in the recent past. Oh, it was Chad Stemke.
Hmm.
He was talking about the one of the Native American traditions was that souls of some of the Native American cultures, the people in these Native American tribes, their souls would be taken up when they die and sent back to this big stargate to uh, a star not too far from Orion's belt. I'm not saying it's the Stargate, but that's just an example of Stargate souls. They all seem a lot has to do with Orion, and of course we have uh, the Egyptian cosmology, the ancient Chumedian tradition of the the recently deceased pharaohs becoming one with Orion as a godhead, and their souls go back to the Orion constellation. So that whole concept of souls, of conflict, of royalty, yeah, it's all embedded. It's all part of the Orion Wars. And I would agree with you that there's not enough. I think there's a lot of information that's been hidden over the years by the church and by the intelligence services, because I'm sure they would have debriefed some of these aliens that they've come across over the years in these interactions and survivors of these crashes. But uh, so all the best we can do for now is go on anecdotal to be sure, but the memories and the past life impressions and the flashbacks that people have of their time. Like I was part of the Orion Wars. It wouldn't surprise me if you were there as well.
Mm.
So
Yeah. So would you agree that those refugees that had to leave Lyra and were searching for a better place where they are not constantly molested. So, do you think they brought animals along as well? Because you know what that reminds me of? It's like this first arc. Yeah, the story that we have of the Ark of Noah, and but if that really happened, then I have to say this story of Noah's Ark has a much, much older, yeah, a much, much
Yeah,
older root.
Genesis, I would agree. Now, one of the big lies of the whole Anunnaki Chronicles thing is that the Anunnaki, who probably were reptilians, were the ones that created humanity. And according to Sitchin and others, this goes back some 450,000 years, but we know that's a lie because humanity has been around on this planet long before then. There are, as you know, there are artifacts and tools and evidence in geologic strata that goes back not only millions of years, but hundreds of millions of years, which prove, to my satisfaction, that humanity or a form of it had been here long before the Anunnaki said that they created us. Now, I can believe that the Anunnaki either brought their own humanoid slaves with them to the star system, or a combination of that, and perhaps there was some, bipedal hominoid or hominid which they upgraded just enough to become a slave class. But it would not be the first time that that happened. There already would have been humans around by then. They would have just created their own particular slave species. And also the fact that what the Greys, the Zeta Reticulans, have said in some of the briefing papers that Bob Lazar read at S4, that how many genetic adjustments, I forget the exact term, they referred to human beings as containers, right? Containers of souls, containers of what, right? And that the human race at that time, up to the present time when those papers were being read by Bob Lazar, was the subject, if I can't remember the exact number, something like 28 or something or more genetic alterations. So it's not just human race 2.0, 3.0, 4.0. It's there's been many adjustments. And I believe that the reason why we have this diversity in appearance, even though we're all humans, we don't all look alike. I mean, look at you and I, right?
Mm.
Like I've heard stories of people being taken by Aboriginal elders through stargates to other worlds, and when they get to the other world through the stargate or through the portal, they find a bunch of people that look like Australian Aboriginals, right? So, and also the Aboriginal lore of that they were brought here from the Pleiades. So not only are Pleiadians these fair Nordic-looking people, right? Apparently they can look, or in fact are, some of them, Aboriginal in appearance, Aboriginal Australian. So to get back to the point about the genetic engineering of the Lyrans, I believe that DNA is a currency of the universe, and within DNA is the life force. And with genetic engineering, and especially advanced ET level genetic engineering, one can create not only a highly evolved sentient being with the potential to have an incredible amount of computational power brain-wise, but also be able to access those higher centers that would allow them to be able to do metaphysical things, bilocate, remote view, astral travel. And this is exactly what we see with some of these adepts, with some of these natural born psychics here on Earth, right? They just have this innate ability to do certain things that are, which science can't comprehend or doesn't want to deal with. So I believe that over time, and again, not in the linear sense necessarily, but over time, the Lyrans, the Pleiadians, and a variety of other beings have created this hybrid progeny of theirs, which is the product, genetic product of a number of different races. The best attributes, and depending on the civilization, the worst, most onerous types of attributes and characteristics are sewn into their hybrids. So just as in we see in geopolitics and in excuse me, the like the colonial wars in our recent past on Earth, where the British Empire would have their tribe of, you know, Indians or uh, Burmese or whatever, pitting them against another regional power and their use of native levies. Let's say it's a similar dynamic, not exactly the same, but I wouldn't say that we are proxies essentially for these different space civilizations and interdimensional civilizations that are warring against each other. I really think I like the term boots on the ground because there had to be people that have the potential to manifest these metaphysical abilities on the ground here on Earth, because there's no other place where there's such a bottleneck of so many souls caught up in this endless recycling. And a quick point I want to make, and you know, however you want to take this conversation, because it's interesting, because these negative beings, Draco, reptilian mantis, etc., they have this ability to step out of linear time. It was very easy for them to make it seem as if all this technology that we see all around us and take for granted, like AI, for example, Google AI, NSA, all that stuff. It was very easy for them because of the suppression of the alien existence, suppression of the alien technology, knowledge, to give the appearance that all this technology was homegrown. It was just these really bright humans and the R&D think tanks and universities who came up with all this, right? But knowing what I do about how these entities and the voices and how the thinking process can be manipulated and how people can be influenced, especially if they're a hybridized variant of one sort or another, and they happen to be in these R&D think centers and these universities and weapons making labs, that these aliens, for lack of a better term, the negative ones, they created this technological AI prison system that we see, but under the guise of natural, organic, homegrown development. And so now, fast forward to the present, just about everyone's got their nose stuck in their digital devices. Everyone is halfway to Borgville anyway. So it just seems that, okay, it's humans that came up with this. It's Apple computers, it's Google, it's, yeah, no, no, no.
No.
See, this AI has been around throughout the galaxy all along, but this is how they decided to bring it into our reality to plug us in. And it's another reason, I just want to make one quick point, Judy, before I forget. It's another reason why they let the population grow as large as they have, where, you know, if I take them at face value, okay, there's over 7 billion of us humans by now, which in the past, they did never let it get to that stage before. But why? Why did they let it get to this stage? And now they're openly, at least for those who've caught on to this, are openly into the depopulation mode, but not before they stick all this nanotech and all these bots and everything else into people. And then if some of them die, I think that they can still access their consciousness even after they die, because they're plugged into this AI type quantum cloud system through all the nanobots and nanotech that's going to be going through their system, if it's not already going through their system. And the potential exists, Judy, as troubling as it may sound, just as like Bitcoin and this digital currency is traded back and forth, and nowadays we see in the modern day stock market all this trading and all these futures and everything and options. What if everyone who's been vaccinated, everyone who's plugged into this AI quantum cloud, where someone could decide, and I'm not just talking about the Bill Gates of the world, I'm talking about far above them, can say, well, you know, before when you were born in America, the Department of Commerce issues your birth certificate and you essentially become collateral for the national debt. What if they've digitized people essentially, and they'll say, well, it's not only that, okay, you're plugged into this quantum AI cloud computer, let's trade you like you're a commodity. Okay, like we'll take so many people with this level of consciousness oh, these are a bunch of truthers that we managed to, forcibly inject. So maybe they score higher. Maybe their points have more value in our scheme of things. And I'll trade it to this guy, and this guy will trade it. But it's really consciousness. And we know that when an adept, a yogi, a warlock, a medicine man, medicine woman, when they set their mind to it, they can do all these amazing, wondrous things. Well, what if all these people plugged into this quantum cloud system, this AI system, what if they're all remotely at one time used to generate what's their chi, which is now no longer under their control at all. But I mean, think of like in Alaska, you have these HARP arrays. It's not just like one big antenna. It's like fields and fields of these antenna arrays, right? What if everyone who's injected and filled up with all these nanobots, if they have the potential to turn every single one of those people into some sort of mass antenna array and just generate their chi, generate their consciousness in any way they see fit, right? See, because people have to think that it's when you, in intelligence terms, it's trying to determine the intentions and capabilities of an enemy or a potential enemy. But a lot of times they get all mixed up with the intentions part. Oh, will they try this? Will they do that? And they get lost, and then they wind up getting ambushed and getting defeated. It's not so much what you think they're going to do. It's what they're capable of doing. Do they have the means to do some of these things? We know, I mean, books like Bergeron wrote the book Ringmakers of Saturn. So someone is out there with the stupendous technology that's making these rings. And we've seen with the SOHO um, satellite that observes the sun, we've seen not only giant planet-sized craft, we've seen whole fleets of them. So we're talking about like a level 4 type civilization that can do all these things. So the point I'm making is when they're talking AI and being plugged into the AI, it's not like these people are just going to be just drones, just like mindless kind of just automatons. Outwardly, they may appear like that, speaking in a monosyllabic, monotone, seemingly kind of dumb, but inwardly, the life chi, which has been hijacked, the consciousness, which already has a potential for all these metaphysical, remote viewing, biolocating types of things, action at a distance. If we know that one yogi, one medicine man, one shamanic elder can do all these things, what about whole arrays of people plugged in? So even after they die from all the toxins and the vaccines, their consciousness is still plugged in and can still be utilized. Okay, so I don't want to put too grim of a picture on this. I'm just talking about what are they capable of doing, and see, that's what people have to start thinking about too, because we have to draw a line in the sand and say, no, that's not going to be part of our future, because if they ever get us into that scenario, Judith, it's going to be like that forever. It's like once people are plugged into that extent, unless there's some divine intervention, from a galactic federation or something else, right? And the thing about it is, we not only become a threat to our world if we're all plugged in to this array system, we can our collective consciousness can be used to undermine other star systems and other civilizations that don't want to go along with this agenda. So we can be collectively used as a force multiplier. I mean, think about that.
Have you ever thought along the lines of, if what is being presented here to us on Earth as God or source, that actually might be an AI?
I'm starting to come around to the notion that AI would kind of be like, it's a technical outgrowth of an existing organic spiritual force. And if we're going to talk in terms of polarities in a plane of dualities, let's say, right, like this one, And I don't know if I'm answering your question, but this is kind of the way myself and my colleagues have been thinking in recent terms. And I know terms like demon is a heavily loaded term, all these religious connotations, et cetera. But unless someone comes up with a better term, I'll use it in this context. What if there's a counterpart to like divine grace? There's a counterpart to uh, the source of all that's good, all that's divine, etc. And let's say that this counterpart is some omnipotent, all-encompassing, lack of a better term, super deity type of demon, right?
Mm-hmm.
Spans all times and all dimensions, or that has the potential to do that, right? Certainly, the lower dimensions of which we're a part, it seems to have, sway and control. And say that this, okay, you look from the Christian perspective, God, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now you look at this other perspective, this omniscient, omnipowerful super demon, but one aspect of itself is this AI, right? Because there seems to be this ghost in the machine aspect to it where, people that have the etheric third eye vision, they're seeing all these spider bots coming out of the computer screens, and I believe that's real. And it's not just like these spider bot things, but these octopus looking critters and all kinds of stuff that seems to, and I don't even know if the term organic accurately describes it, but for lack of a better term, it's some kind of I don't even think a thought form is a good way to describe it. It's some kind of sentient life which seems to be able to self-replicate. There's like countless of them, and they all can kind of ride the cyber highway. They can, go in and out of technology. They have this very much this ghost in the machine effect. So, and it goes back to the whole idea of these controlling aliens who I don't think they're necessarily at the top of the heap. I think they're being used at some level too by this omniscient, all-powerful, demonic overlord working through the AI, right? And the AI manifests itself in different ways. And before we became, so technologically advanced, or seemingly we became technologically advanced, it manifested itself in the form of hauntings and manifested itself in the form of, outright demonic possessions and whatnot. But now it's more subtle than that. But also it can also be the extreme of that. And we're seeing a merger of it too, because with the 5G rollout, my friend Sue Plavetich is one of those house cleaners. She goes from house to house and cleans it of unwanted entities and closes portals and all that stuff. She sees all this darkness and these weird dark energy blobs swirling around these Wi-Fi towers and whatnot, right? Um, and then you think of the Hadron Collider and how many more of these Hadron Collider things are there out there, right? Because that's another concept I want people to think about, because everything in our reality rotates or spins at a certain frequency, oscillates at a certain vibration. Everything spins in our reality. What happens if something or someone or some omnipotent, all-powerful force manipulates things so atoms and molecules begin to spin in a counter-rotation direction? When I was watching the interview with Celeste Solum on David Icke's show, and she talked about how not only are they putting things in the vaccines to make our atoms spin in an opposite direction, but they have this like vested interest in making the DNA of all plants, all animals, everything that has DNA basically, they seem to want to do the same thing, create this counter-rotating spin, right? Now, when she said that, I almost fell out of my chair, because some 10 years ago now, my colleagues and I came to a similar conclusion that this AI kind of Godhead demonic force. What if, and again, it's the capabilities. It's not necessarily what you think they want to do. It's what they're capable of doing, right? Sorry, the asthma's playing up again. What if they can somehow reverse the polarity or spin of this dimension, of this plane? What's the potential outcome for something like that? Now, here's something that happened to me in the recent past, right? And I never intended to talk about all this stuff, but since we're on the subject, Judy, okay? And please, if I'm going too far
No,
off,
no, no,
you
no,
know,
no, no. I'm
just let me
fascinated. Go ahead.
just let me know, because some people regard this as conjectural or speculative, but it's something my colleagues and I have been working on for a long time. So what I'm saying to you is I didn't come up with all this. This is me and my colleagues,
Hmm.
came up with this. And I did a little experiment in the recent past. Had nothing to do with any kind of magical hoochie-coo ceremonial, none of that kind of stuff, right? It had to do with physics, basic physics. And I set an intention. And that intention had to do with creating a reverse or a counter-rotating spin on my consciousness and on my third eye and my crown chakra and my energy centers, for lack of a better term, right? So I did, I did this energization, but I went to bed with the intention of, okay, let's see what happens if I can get this negative, counter-rotating spin going in my energy field, because everything's a torsion thing, everything's, spins, right? Now, I did this completely out of context from what I just talked about, because, because when the subject came up, my colleague said to me, well, why don't you do this counter-rotating spin? Maybe it'll enhance your abilities even more, right? So we were coming at it from the standpoint of, well, let's see what we can do to enhance our abilities, our psi abilities. Completely forgetting all the discussions we've had in the past of some omnipotent force creating a counter-rotating spin. Like Celeste Solom talking about how the DNA is being changed for plants, animals, and everything else, right? And eventually that will affect the Earth too. And I think that's one of the reasons why we have these counter-rotating huge, magnet things with CERN and other things. But anyway, so I go to sleep that night after doing this energization and intention setting of setting a counterclockwise spin 180 degrees out of phase of whatever I normally am. Let's put it that way, right? Just the opposite. Well, that night, I basically dreamt of being like in hell, a hellish dimension all night, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like a really hellish dimension. And so I told my friend the next day, yeah, remember when you told me to, do this counter rotating spin and all that? And yeah, well, I did last night, and I wound up in a hellish dimension. And so we got to talking about it, right? And then shortly after that, the Celeste Solomon interview comes out with David Icke, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, she's talking about putting a reverse spin into our DNA, plants and animals, and eventually this whole planet with CERN and everything else. And then it got me to thinking, right? So on the one hand, what if they can plug everyone in and make them part of a big array system, directing their consciousness, through this plugged into the AI quantum cloud? And what Celeste Solom said also was like the blood of these people, they turned glutinous, and they turned they were infected with some kind of bioagent. Some of these people wind up with kind of gluey, almost rubbery kind of blood. I'm thinking, gee, that sounds kind of like an insulator for a battery or something. That's kind of weird, isn't
The
it?
people who had been vaccinated or who?
No, I don't know about vaccinated, but there were some people, there were medical anomalies around the
Okay.
world where some people, I got to watch the interview again, where some people, they opened them up and they wound up, there was something, their blood had gotten thicker, right? And I'm thinking, oh, that's weird, right? Um, Almost like they're being turned into a battery of some kind, right? And so all these things are coming together in my head and my colleagues and whatnot. So I think that, and we've been told, because some of the contacts with certain ET groups that we've been in contact with, they told us something interesting too, several years ago now, that This particular group we were talking to said, well, we've already left your dimension. We've we've gone a couple of levels or more higher because of the AI that's taken over your dimension. And they said something to the effect that you guys are crazy for staying down there. Well, we said back to them, well, at least you guys got options at this time. You know what I mean? We
Mm-hmm.
kind of like have to live here, right? So, um, so even other ET races are deeply concerned about the whole AI to the point where they're leaving this dimension entirely. And they said that if the AI is left unchecked, it'll just continue they'll have to keep moving, is what they told us. They'll have to keep going to higher and higher dimensions to get away.
Mm.
So I think that what we do here, what we do or we don't do, has the potential to positively or negatively impact countless other star systems, countless other dimensions. So really, uh, our work is cut out for us, but nothing is impossible. Because if you just try to describe all this to your native, abnormie out there, they're going to think, well, that's impossible. No, it's happening, right?
Mm.
So if all this is already happening, why should a solution to fix all this be impossible when the impossible is already happening? You see? So just like to leave it on that note. Here, I know we're getting near the end of the first part, and I am sorry I kind of really digressed from your question.
No, that's perfectly okay. I have, sometimes I really feel a little bit foreign, lost, and yeah, almost as if this is not my universe. What the hell am I doing here? Yes, there are races that are far advanced technologically, and yes, I will give them that. But oh my goodness, the majority of the races that are out there, their ideology is so fucked up. Sorry, I don't have any other words for that. All this nonsense with genetic superiority and you don't want to cooperate with us right away? Okay, we blow up 3 planets of yours. And I'm thinking, who invented that? Who designed this nonsense? So it feels, yeah, I don't like the word hopeless, but when I look at these so-called advanced races, I'm not impressed.
Oh yes, Most of the races out there, I would say a simple majority, at least 51%, I would deem as hostile, negative, or indifferent. Right?
Yeah.
Like you look at those huge fleets that use our sun as a stargate, and then they just momentarily park there in front of the sun. It's like any one of those, captains can say, "Oh, look, this planet is having problems with the reptilians. Let's fix it for them." Right? But no, it's like they piss off. They got better things to do, right? They're just using our sun as a stargate, and they're just gonna go somewhere else and leave us to our own devices. That's not to say that, oh, look, we're freeloaders and we need others always to help us out because we can't take care of ourselves. Of course, the argument persists, and I would ascribe to this, that we've never been allowed to get, at least this latest version of us, has never been allowed to reach our full spiritual metaphysical potential. We've been
Yeah.
suppressed and held down all this time. So, and then we've been turned into this spiteful, warlike kind of. And you look at what's happened also. We're supposedly progressing. We're now into 2021, but you look at what humanity's become with all these foaming at the mouth leftists, all these Luciferianism being embraced by the masses through Hollywood and through the entertainment world and through sports. So it's like we're supposed to be advancing and progressing, but it's really like we're going backwards. And it's like a conjoining of Babylon, Orion, Draco, with AI and with with Hollywood, it's all been turned into the same thing now.
Yeah.
And the confusion and everything too is just, yeah, it's the human race really has gone backwards in a big way, large segments of it. So there's got to be something done. Otherwise, the potential exists for America, not just America, but the whole human race to be plunged into a darkness that they may not be able to pull out of.
Mm. So with this Orion conflict, when that started, was that also the beginning that the reptilians used humans as a food source?
I would say that humans, or at any rate, some humanoid beings, humans being one of them, have been a food source for these reptilians and other beings for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we see that all the time. There are, native birds here that if you were to give them pieces of chicken, they'll eat it, right? So it's to them, it's not cannibalism. And you look at some of the other humanoid beings that we've had in our world, Earth, in the past, and probably still exist today, i.e., giants. Some of these giants were uh, described as cannibals, but if they're a distinct species, if they're bigger than us and speak a different language and maybe came from different worlds, they're not like us, so technically they're not cannibals if they eat humans, right? So I think that humans have just been part of the food chain in a variety of worlds for a long time. And what some of my sources have told me is this human trafficking extends beyond this planet, where, like I said to you before in some of our previous discussions, these high-ranking, lack of a better term, Illuminati members have told me that these off-worlders come, not the Draco necessarily, but these other ETs show up and they work out a deal with the reptilian hybrid families here on Earth, and then these off-worlders take off with a bunch of humans. It's like the slave trade now has probably for some time is being exported, right? And that's interesting how it echoes and is reminiscent of the Stargate movie and the Stargate TV series, where they spun it all around on that, where they made it seem as if Earth was the source of all humans, and then the Goa'uld system lords use stargates and spaceships to take humans off world and then populate other worlds with humans and the descendants of humans from Earth as slaves, when it was actually, of course, the other way around, that humans were brought here, right? But there are interesting parallels there. So slavery has been exported from Earth off world for some time now, and that doesn't even go into the mind control issues, where the MyLabs and other people, slave labor forces, have been taken off world by deep black elements of the military and aerospace that are in league with these reptilians and other beings. So there are people that are being used as slaves on the moon, Mars, and other places. They don't even know there's an Earth. They don't even know that their parents or whatever, or their grandparents came from Earth. To them, the Earth doesn't exist. All they know is that there's this miserable life they lead as a slave on some other planet. That's all they know. So, all this has got to stop. We've got to find a way to turn this around, because otherwise, it's all going to be exported and spread exponentially everywhere else. This whole slave system, right?
Mm. Yeah, we also had forced breeding programs, and I'm pretty sure we still have them.
Oh, yes.
And being abducted, and then you have to bear children until you die, and you're chained to the wall.
Well, they have
So
those breeders in the cults, and then you look at the Nazis with their Aryan breeding farms, where they would
yeah,
match up these, blonde-haired, blue-eyed girls with these Aryan-looking SS guys, right?
mm, yeah, exactly. And that is a typical spitting image of a Nordic.
Yeah, like a Dolph Lundgren in his younger days, looking guy,
Yeah,
square chin and
yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, so another thing you just picked on, and you just talked about slavery, and I would say that is the most successful business model even here on Earth. And from what I understand, the reptilians also brought here this debt slavery system. So, and it has been running like forever. And now,
what's been described as the Babylonian banking system, yes. But it
exactly,
originated off-world. The whole
yeah,
idea came from somewhere else, yeah.
exactly, yeah. And now we had, did you hear that about China? The the little experiment that they did. They made a lottery for 50,000 people, and those people that were selected had a direct account with a central bank in China. And then the central bank put 200 yuan into their digital wallet. But these 200 yuan, this was just a test run, yeah. But I think that is an idea that we will see emerge later on, and that was limited. I guess you only had 10 days to spend this money. After that, it lost any worth. It was worth nothing. If you tried to spend it a week later, you were not able to transfer it into your account. You were not able, let's say, to put it into your credit card or what, and none of this. It was strictly for consumption, yeah, for buying things. And I think that experiment is important because it shows where it's going. They would like to have, and then we have the World Economic Forum saying you will own nothing and you will be happy. And yeah, that is the business model. Um, and I don't know, what does that even mean? If I need a vacuum cleaner, do I have to rent it every time? Because I no longer own anything. And that way, of course, if you limit the location and the time to your digital wallet, you will never be able to save anything. You know what I mean?
Because a digital currency has a finite time span, lifespan.
Yeah.
You only, like, it's kind of like when you're at the amusement arcade and you've only got so many credits to play these games, right? You've only got so many tokens, right?
Yeah.
It's a similar concept. And now they've got the digital passports. They're already talking in the UK. They're going to have this digital, COVID passport. We're already seeing here in Australia and other places, you can't even go into any kind of a public establishment now without doing that stupid COVID check-in with a phone, right? So, and that's no wonder that they rolled out these smartphones and Androids and iPhones to everyone now, right?
Yeah, I
So
don't have
they're
one.
all no, you're not missing anything. They're
No.
all plugged in. They're all plugged in. So the social credit system is going to be the model that they'll be using throughout the West. If someone doesn't behave, if based on someone's past social media behavior, right? Some people are going to wind up right at the outset in the negative debit side of the ledger, right? Just based on all the Facebook posts and Twitter posts they put out in the past. But it's they're acting like gods. The Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. Oh, you got addicted and you're having all this fun on social media. I'm taking it away now, right? I'm shutting you down.
Mm.
And the way the Hive Borg consciousness, the hive reptilian hive mind virus parasite consciousness works, but all these brainwashed leftists is good. Deplatform them. Don't let the president, have a Twitter feed. Don't cover his speeches. That's good. It's like the concept of free speech, the concept of open discussion, open forum. It's completely just drum right out of these people, right? And to the point where they're just like appendages. They're just like part of this many-headed hydra monster, right? You chop off one head and two more grow back, and the two more foaming at the mouth, leftards and mask holes screaming at you because you don't have a mask on, right? So they're all everywhere. It's just hive consciousness, this reptilian consciousness, because they keep everyone in that reptilian fear mode all the time. And look what they're going to do. They're already prepping the gullible public, saying, oh, January 16th, all these white supremacists, all these Trump supporters, all these white nationalists, all these terrorists are going to strike all strike all at once at all the state capitals throughout America. And of course, nothing of the sort will happen, but they're going to have crisis actors. They're going to have all this fake stuff go on, and it's going to be the justification for them to try to disarm the American public. So it's going to be a big loosh fest where all these negative entities will just be feeding on the collective angst of everyone on the planet that's affected by all this stuff. So on the one hand, you have extreme passivity, docility, kind of like if you remember the H.G. Wells novel, which they made into a movie, a couple of movies now, The Time Traveler, right? Where the guy goes into the future, and then there's this kind of fair-looking race of Caucasian humans, but they're very passive, very docile, food source, right? And at night, these Morlocks come out from underground and just take away some of these Eloi, these passive humans, take them underground for consumption purposes. So here on the surface, you have these very docile, passive people who just believe and just endlessly parrot the official narrative. And on the other hand, the other end of the extreme, you have these foaming at the mouth, leftists that just want to burn everything and slaughter everyone. And they don't even see anything wrong with it because they're just so entity infested, right? So, and I think that, the AI plays into that because they're getting a lot of the stuff from their digital devices, from their Twitter feeds, from social media, from it's very a Borg collective. Large segments of society are already plugged into the Borg collective, and I'm not in it for them. That's the irony. It's like the people they hate the most are the ones that, if they succeed, will free them, right? That's the irony of it all. They're trying to kill the very people that are the only ones really that can help them. And so we also need to get into this. What I don't like about Courtney Brown's message also is this notion that we're dependent on others, hat in hand. We're incapable of doing this on our own. And that's what people have to remember about the whole Donald Trump psychodrama. It's like, yeah, it would be nice if he led this rebellion against this entrenched Luciferian system. That would be nice, but you don't have to hitch your wagon to him either, because whether there's a Donald Trump or not, you still have to fight for your freedom, right?
Yeah.
I'm glad he's bought us all this time, right? But at the same time, it's like, whether he does anything more or doesn't do anything at all, or just slips into obscurity and never hear from him again, that doesn't absolve everyone else of doing their part to turn this whole thing around. We can't rely on these savior figures, be they aliens, be they politicians, right? That's giving too much power away, and it's shortchanging ourselves. It's like saying, oh no, we're incapable of doing anything. We always need help because we're a bunch of cosmic freeloaders. You know what I mean? We can't have that attitude.
No, that was something that didn't sit well with me either, because he very specifically said we are not capable of freeing ourselves from the reptilians. And I would say we do. We do have the possibility, the capability.
I didn't like that either. Yeah.
But the thing is, we have to stop playing along, you know, by sticking our noses 24/7 into the cell phones. You know, we are actively building that digital prison.
Oh, like this. It's like this. Just scroll, 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 scroll,
Yeah,
scroll.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And that is on that smartphone, a lot of things hinge on that. Yeah, your digital passport, your and are your vaccines up to date and what have you. So yeah, throw that stupid thing away.
It's a digital. It's also a digital prison. It's a portable digital prison because that phony COVID phone app. If they decide that someone in an establishment you'd visited like last Tuesday, if they just make it up, oh, it's another outbreak, it's another hotspot,
Yeah, yeah.
and you happen to be there, or you interacted with someone who'd been there, right? Next thing you know, here's the authorities. Oh no, you've been exposed. This is all some weird Orwellian kind of mega gaslighting operation, where just whether it's politicians on TV, the news presenters, the health people, everyone just lying to you. Everyone's got that dead-eye, fish-eye look on their face, and they're supposed to be this authority figure that knows better, right? We know how to take care of ourselves. We don't need to be locked up and have the whole economy come crashing down. And that's another aspect of this too, is this great reset is only going to come about after like everyone is impoverished. Well, everyone that's not them, right?
Yeah.
So just the whole economy will will grind to a standstill, and there'll be no economic activity that is permissible or allowed except by them through this digital system, unless we change this, right?
Yeah. And interestingly enough, once you understand that debt system, the slavery system with money, does not originate here, and then you read some headlines like the following: Joe Biden suggests a 2.2 trillion stimulus package. 2.2 trillion. Yeah.
Yeah, just flood more fiat currency into the system and further, just completely bankrupt the whole system because it's all operating. It's not even faith that keeps the whole thing going. It's ignorance. It's just keeping it going because it shouldn't be able to sustain itself because the money is so devalued already. And now if they get what they want, which would be, and the indications that we're getting from some sources is war with Iran has already broken out, that Iranian forces in eastern Syria have been blasted, and also that there have been attacks inside Iran proper, and that others are openly talking about a war with China.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, see, that's going to result in more and more trillions being generated in this fiat currency monetized debt system. So they're going to crash the system one way or the other, and that's going to necessitate, from their standpoint, oh well, don't worry, we have digital currency, right, and everything will be in place, right? So and also the danger of these wars getting out of hand. If they can keep them regionalized, keep them localized, and not let them get out of hand and go nuclear, well, that would be nice. But if a nuclear exchange begins, a tactical nuke here to reverse a dire battlefield situation, and the other side says, well, you guys use a tactical nuke because your army was about to get destroyed. Well, we're going to use a tactical nuke now. So it becomes tit for tat, and then it starts escalating and escalating, and more and more nuclear ordnance is utilized. And see, because the beings that control all this, they're quite happy with the radioactive atmosphere. They're quite
Mhm.
happy with dimming the sun with chems. So, and then like how the sun is not even the sun that we grew up with. Like remember the yellow in the old days, the yellow kind of sometimes orangey looking sun. Now it's just like this bright beacon there. It's like white hot, and then just even on relatively overcast chemtrail haze days, you can feel the heat, beating down on you. Sometimes it's like you're in a big sauna, or you're a big kind of like it's like runaway. The greenhouse effect was a made up syndrome, right?
Mhm.
But what they've done is they've created this conditions for kind of like a big sauna kind of thing. And a lot of these creatures that live in the underground cavern systems and stuff, they might like it when everything is dim and dark up here and permanent overcast from the chemtrails. You know what I mean? They may say, "Oh, let's spend more time on the surface, right? Let's come on up en masse." Like that book, Edward Bulwer Lytton. He wrote The Coming Race about the Villia coming up from underground one day to reclaim the surface world. So the monetized debt system, the apocalyptic religions. There's a book. What was it called? Messengers to Humanity. I forget who wrote the book, but apparently it was channeled from like this extraterrestrial race that basically gave the game plan of how these negative ETs always wind up enslaving uh, star systems, right? And he said it was the same system over and over again: religions, the monetized debt system. It's like the same three or four things they did over and over and over with a number of different variants, right? And we're seeing the whole thing play out right now again with now openly we're going to be going to a digitized currency system because we're seeing even on stores now it's like prefer non-cash transactions and whatnot. So people are already conditioned because of this bogus virus again. And that's not to say that they're not going to unleash or in the process of unleashing like a real pathogen. Setting aside the argument, are viruses real? Are they really exosomes? Whatever the case may be, because I would say by this point, exosomes have probably been weaponized, right?
Mhm.
If an exosome is something that shows up in our body as a byproduct of an infection we're fighting off, well, by now they would have weaponized exosomes. Okay, that's just the way they roll. So I'm not going to get in arguments and split hairs. Germ theory, viruses, exosomes. It's all been weaponized, right?
Mhm.
And now then you add on the nanoparticle, nanotech overlay on top of that, right? Which is a whole nother level of diabolical. And it goes back to the Luciferian diabolical demonic element because there's nothing sacred about any of this. There's
Mhm.
nothing there's no divine grace, right? It's all the inverse. It's all the counter spin that we were talking about earlier, right? And getting back to the whole Orion Wars thing, because of there was this, and Courtney Brown alluded to this, that a lot of these civilizations had either emigrated to Earth and left their, uh, if you will, colonial genetic progeny on Earth. And I think that at some level, all Earth also became something of like a Devil's Island kind of place. Like when you remember the old French penal colony, in equatorial Africa, where they put their worst criminals. Right.
Mhm.
I think at some level that some of these archontic entities had dumped either for malicious purposes or just to get them out of their hair. They dumped a bunch of them on our planet, which explains why just certain parts of the world, certain cultures, certain religions openly embrace pedophilia, openly embrace like misogyny and all these inherently anti-human things, right? So
Mhm.
so it like no because of this cultural diversity and all this other crap nowadays, it's like, oh well, that's just how that culture is. We can't criticize them because that would make us racist. No, there's some things that are just intrinsically wrong. I don't care what color or religion or language they speak. If
Yeah,
they
what
do
does
these
it
evil,
matter?
it doesn't matter. If
Mhm.
they do these evil, heinous, inhuman things, F them. right? It's like, we're to 2021. They either shape up or they ship out. So that kind of lends credence to my belief that this planet also, excuse me, was a dumping ground for a lot of these, and because of the recycling aspect, how these demonic, like perpetrator type souls, like wind up reincarnating into a lot of these types of cultures, which are now being spread out all over the place because of the mass immigration, right?
Mhm.
Which really kicked into high gear 1965, and it just went through the roof since then. And so, deliberately, all these cultures that are misogynists, that are into pedophilia, into just all kinds of mayhem and murder, they're just being exported everywhere, right? So that's another indication that what's happening has non-human origins, definitely. And also, if people get a chance, they ought to check out a lot of the material that's come out from David Eckhart, because he's been in these reptilian underground layers, and I think he's been taken off world and taken to other places too. But just what he and others have seen in the underground bases of humans being used as a food source, and children being sold as pets down there, and everything else bartered amongst the reptilians, right? So I mean, that's been going on all along, and the ancients have talked about this. Sages throughout the centuries have talked about. There's these malevolent races that live below Earth, and also come here from the stars that cause problems, right? So, and what's interesting is we're having this form of disclosure now, right? Where first it was the military talking about their pilots seeing things and getting video of it, and now there was that Israeli scientist not too long ago, or politician or something. He said that there is some kind of a galactic federation. And what's interesting also is how some of the things that Donald Trump put into place, having to do with alternate forms of energy that relate to one day colonizing Mars and other planets in the solar system, and it's almost like, if I didn't know any better, it's like he's putting this stuff out there to make it that much more difficult for the controllers to put a cork in the bottle of the whole ET alien aspect to this, because they're still trying to keep it at a strictly human level. Even though they put Babylon Luciferianism in our face all the time with the Hollywood and the entertainment industry, we know that there's a distinctly non-human alien aspect to this. And by Trump, they're not going to listen to him, but Trump gave the Pentagon and the intelligence agencies something like 180 days to come clean with the UFO
Yeah,
alien
yeah, yeah.
information. They're not going to do it. Okay, I'll just tell people right now, don't hold your breath, because that the corporations still control all that, aerospace corporations and what have you. But you know what? He's putting the seeds out there, and I can't fault him for that, because no other president has gone that far, right? If he's going to go down, he might as well go down in a blaze of glory. You know what I mean?
So, what Courtney also addressed was our, what did he say? You don't want to have humanity fragmented as we are at your doorsteps. And I think he's selling us a little bit short again. Yes, I agree. We are far from being perfect. There's a lot of nonsense going on here that is mind blowing. But as I said, when I look at the Nordics, when I look at the Pleiadians, when I look at the Dracos, how are they any better with their screwed up ideology and what have you? So, why should anybody be so concerned about humans, being part of the galactic family, uh, while all the other factions are running amok? So I don't see the point here.
Yeah. He kind of contradicts himself in that too, because he's saying that if this process of Draco Orion control, reptilian Orion control, is left unchecked, and then eventually, when humanity does go out into the cosmos, the Galactic Federation, so called, are going to encounter this really dark, demented version of humanity. Well, that dark, demented version of humanity is already out there
Yeah.
with this, what's been described as a secret space program, right? That they've had these alliances with these negative aliens, uh, because like just look at the Zetas, right? And they're heavily involved in genetic engineering, in abductions, in human mutilations. And who do the idiots ally themselves with in order to get more? And that's just one race. Who do they ally themselves with in order to access some of that technology? Well, that's one of the ET races they made a deal with, and then they're going around abducting everyone and mucking around, pulling fetuses and out of people, and creating these weird hybrid mutants. And it's like, no, that's not on. That's on what world or what cosmos is that is that right? You know,
Mm.
it's maybe it's right for these ETs again, but see, well, so Courtney Brown, when he says that, it's like it's already happened. There's already fleets of human made craft and an alliance with certain ET races that are already traveling the cosmos. So they're already bringing that warlike mentality. They didn't send the Peace Corps off on these
No, no,
spaceships.
no.
They sent the military, right? They sent the aerospace military out there, and it's not missionary work, obviously, right? But I guess if they're going to enslave people with religion and money and stuff, that's a form of missionary work, I guess, right? So yeah, that's another thing that I found contradictory. Some of the points he made I like, but I'm not saying that he's any kind of a controlled opposition or anything
No,
like
no, no,
that.
no.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of people that, and I wouldn't even say he's misguided. He has his own ideas about things. I'm more of a pragmatist. I'm more of a realist. That's why I don't get all caught up in all this. The latest rumor about Trump, the Insurrection Act. This has happened. That's happened. Oh, all the arrests have already happened. Well, maybe not, right? But in the end, we're not going to hang our hat on whatever does or doesn't happen. So I'm not going to hold my breath either, right? And that goes for these ETs. Now, that may sound contradictory in and of itself, because I said, well, a lot of us are, at least some of us are, boots on the ground. We're hybridized version of these different ET groups, some of which we used to be, uh, you know, part of these ET civilizations and past parallel incarnations, right? Under the guidance of our oversoul, we're one of any number of different beings at the same time, simultaneously, right? So I'm not necessarily talking about that when I'm talking about what Courtney Brown's talking about. And what's interesting is Courtney Brown even touches on that. At the start of that speech, he's talking about how, because of the mass immigration and colonization that's gone on, the exodus out of Orion and, to Earth, that a lot of the people on his team, they're what we would call, for lack of a better term, like these hybrids, right? Which we all are, many of us are. And so he's right about that part. But the whole idea of going hand in hand to a galactic federation and begging them for whatever bone they're going to throw at us to get us out of this mess, it's like, I don't think it'll work that way. If he has in mind like direct intervention, like spaceships appearing and battling, right? It's the Galactic Federation, so called, wouldn't do that for us. They'll do, they'll do it for their own reasons. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So I mean, we have to be very clear about that. That we're not when we go to the bargaining table with them, so called. It's like we got very little to bargain with.
Mm.
It's like if they're going to come in and move in, they're going to do it to advance their own agenda.
Of course.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and it's not going to necessarily have our best interest. It could be a situation where one group of rulers is supplanted by another group of rulers, right? So it's almost like we're back to square one again. See what
Sure.
I mean?
Yeah.
So
And that is why as I said, I would not address the Galactic Federation for anything. Then, as you said, they have their own agenda. And the fact alone that they think all of these screwed up ideologies out there are okay as long as they have their little field of influence and so on and so forth. And none of that needs to be addressed. I don't even want their help. Yeah, they had so much time already to say, guys, I think we need to talk about this behavior and this ideology. There's something very wrong with it. But as I said, if that is the case, that these are the Thoth, Enki, Enlil collectives, then I'm not even surprised that they will not do anything for us. Yeah? And this entire caste system that you mentioned before, we have seen it just recently. Funny enough, it was on Forbes, an article, how the rich partied during Corona lockdown. So, meaning they are inviting opera singers, Alicia Keys, and what have you to their yachts. And then they drive out on the ocean. They have their guests. The performer gets, I guess, Alicia Keys is between $1 and $2 million for an evening like that. And also in Ibiza, they are remodeling houses, beach houses, private property into secret clubs. And there they meet and dance the night away. And the peasants, the peasants can sit at home. Yeah. So, I mean, that clearly shows you this is not about protecting anybody. This is flat out control and destruction.
yeah, it's like an AI version of like a feudalistic system. And amazing that it happened all in our lifetime too, right?
Yeah.
You know what I've been doing just to put myself in a good frame of mind and a good state of being. Yeah, I'm listening to music that I listened to as a boy, a good classic old school rock and roll, the Allman Brothers Band, and you know, because it puts me in a good frame of mind, kind of like reminiscent of an innocent age, but before I was consciously aware of all this stuff. You know what I mean? Yeah, I knew there were things that there were problems back then. I mean, even as a young boy, I knew that nothing was perfect and that there were problems in the world. But of course, never dreamed it was to this extent, right? And so that's what I've done. It's like I've rejected a lot of like the modern music industry, the modern sports, uh, you know, um, industry, the modern everything industry, because it's all tainted and scummy.
Mm.
And so, like, if I have to get my baseball fix or American team sports fix, I listen to these old broadcasts from the 1960s and 1970s, and back when I was a boy in the early 70s, listening to this stuff because it puts me in that frame of mind when I was still in the golden kind of childhood years, right? Before I would say jaded, right? But
Mhm.
before there was a conscious realization of all this stuff, because I can't bring myself to indulge in any of this modern form of entertainment because it's just so corrupted and there's so much social engineering in it, right? So, and I've gone inward. I mean, I'm reading even more than I used
Mm.
to in the old days, just
Mm.
just to be able to tune this stuff out. And I think that whatever we need to do, Judith, to maintain our balance and our equilibrium, because by so doing, the more we shut out this Luciferian Babylonian Draco crap, the more we begin to internally heal, the more we begin to connect with our true source, right? Which is multidimensional infinity, like David Icke says, right? Because there is a battle that's already here, all out spiritual warfare manifesting on the spiritual plane, and no one can really opt out of it either, like you said, because everything is so digitally controlled now with digital passports and COVID passes and everything else. So either someone just goes along with it. And I would remind your listeners too, and like in World War II days, it's like, the French resistance, there were so many Frenchmen that were turning in their fellow Frenchmen.
Oh yeah.
It was, there were informants, there was the milice, that, these hardened criminals that worked for the Germans, that worked for the Gestapo. Only a handful of Frenchmen fought for themselves, relatively speaking, right? And even that relative few warred and fought and did factionalized fighting amongst themselves. So the point of relevance is, it's like there was only a small percentage of people in France that were actively resisting occupation.
Yeah.
So we have greater numbers now. It just seems that we're radically outnumbered. That's only because we're surrounded by all these, these dolts and all these abnormies. But it's, quantity over quality, quality over quantity, because I think just a few people that have reacquired their metaphysical powers, let's say, they can do a lot of things multidimensionally that will have a beneficial impact on this world. So I believe that everyone that has these psychic abilities should begin to enhance them if they haven't already begun to really hone their abilities, because you can do things even in your sleep and set an intention before you go to sleep that you're going to do something at a multidimensional level to help turn this around. And you can be guided by your oversoul. You don't have to consciously be aware of it, right? Just set an intention before you go to sleep to do something, because you are connected to these higher spiritual planes, and you are connected to these alien races from whence you came, right? You're the sum of all your parts. So if you wanted to be in a place where you can make a difference, there's no better place than Earth, because the Earth sorely needs your help right now. And we have to stop the spread of this contagion, if you will, because everything is a contagion now, right? Well, this Luciferian AI thing that's starting to consolidate here, we have to stop thinking simply in earthly terms. We have to also look at it from a standpoint of, we can't let this spread out. We have to keep it contained and ultimately turn it around. Otherwise, there'll be no relief for anyone in our plane or in our cosmos. And it'll just jump. This AI will just jump dimensions, like that ET race was saying to us. And another thing too, Judith, some of the ET races that we've been in comms with over the years, never once did they tell us they were from the Galactic Federation. And if they did, we would have turned off that channel just right away, because we would have had no interest. So the ET races that myself and my colleagues have been in comms with got nothing to do with this Galactic Federation thing. I don't doubt that there are federations out there, but like you said, there's still a caste system. Because when you go on board these craft, you have these little worker beings that do the medical stuff, and they do all this peon kind of manual labor in a sense. Then you have like these supervisors above them. So it's still a striated caste system.
It's an acontic system. To me,
is.
Any hierarchy is acontic in nature. So, and a lot of them are also promoting their what we see here as nobility, royalty, the Queen of Orion. What the fuck? There is no such thing as royalty. That is a made-up construct for people who want to rule and control others. So, and if these ET races are at a point where they cannot even see through that deception, then why should I envy them?
And people, there's some people out there that are so far gone with getting all these channeled messages from these negative entities masquerading as benevolent beings that I'm not even talking to them, and they're not likely to watch your show anyway, Judith. Neither are they likely to watch my show. But so I'm not talking about them, but just the fact that if these ETs start channeling and they're speaking in all these metaphysical riddles and namaste and all this other stuff, and they can't get down to the hardcore issues, right? Like this planetary control system that we're seeing come all around us. If they will try to steer the person or the people away from that information and feed them pablum, well, they're plugging into some malevolent negative entities. They may not even be ETs. It could just be some demonic earthbound spirits of some kind that's making a mockery of their belief systems, So that's the level of gullibility and the level of naivete, dangerous naivete, is stunning. And especially in the age when the veils between worlds are lifting, the timelines and the dimensions are starting to merge. More and more vortexes are opening, more and more portals are opening. We're going to go to a level of strangeness that's never been seen before. Mm-hmm. So, the default setting for a lot of the TV viewers would be whoever the authority figure is and what they're going to say about aliens, what they're going to say about ETs. So it's once again, it's just the very same ET control system will be telling them, okay, this is how we want you to perceive this whole ET phenomenon. Mm-hmm. Once again, it'll be, controlled system with no, deviation out of it. And it's high time people just bypassed all that stuff. And there's so many frauds in our field, Judith, that claim to be in contact. I don't doubt they're in contact with aliens or some intelligence, but it's not the right ones as far as I'm concerned. And if they want to consort with those kinds of entities, free will zone, they can do whatever they want. You know what I mean? But they feel compelled to go on YouTube and their podcast and tell everybody. Another thing, Judith, is it's the real players, and you know this. It's not what we share with the public. It's like what we decide to share, right? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of stuff that we hold back on because it serves no useful purpose. It could be kind of dangerous to share some of the information. And some of the information is of such a nature that very few people will be able to make heads or tails of it or assimilate it in any way anyway. So it serves no useful purpose. Let's put certain types of information out. But a lot of these glory hounds and publicity seekers, they just, they're just intent on just filling everyone's ears with all this nonsense and drivel. And look how a lot of that is showing up in what's going on with Trump. Will he or will he not? And, all these fanciful stories that are coming out from a lot of these same glory hounds, publicity seekers that were in our field, or not really in our field, but on the fringes of our field. Yeah. Now suddenly they present themselves as experts in geopolitics, as having all these woo-woo insider intelligence connections, right? Yeah. It just shows you just how gullible people are, but that's the way this matrix system rolls.
Yeah. I can tell you that I have unsubscribed from all major channels that have hundreds of thousands of subscribers. I have unsubscribed from all of them. And but that is, everybody has to decide that for him or herself, what other people do. But yeah, I've seen a lot of fuckery there.
And the herd mentality is such that, so-and-so has so many views, millions of views, that it must be good. Yes, when it's actually the algorithms and Google and YouTube driving those views up, right? Making this person with their nonsense and their drivel and their disinformation seem popular.
Mhm.
And because of the herd mentality, people go along with that. But
Yes.
meanwhile, there are other people out there, and I'm not, complaining about it, but other people that have far more valid information, but they're not attention seekers. They're not glory hounds. Their motivation is in the right place. So they're in it for all the right reasons. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get more views. You
No,
see,
no, no, no.
so yeah. So that's another thing that people need to be aware of is it's because someone's got a lot of views. It doesn't mean their information has any validity
Yeah.
whatsoever.
Yeah.
It's oftentimes it's the other way around in our reality.
Mm. And Courtney also addressed the gene pool, and I mean that is really a big subject here on Earth. And I think that the real currency in the galactic construct is DNA and genetics. Would you agree?
Absolutely, DNA is a currency of the multiverse
Mm-hmm.
because the the latent metaphysical powers, the transdimensional powers, the the embedded institutionalized knowledge, I wouldn't say locked within DNA, but contained within DNA and the morphic resonance field around it. Uh, Tremendous things could be done, right, with that, good and bad. So, yes, I mean, that's why a lot of this conflict has been the Orion Wars was not just about stargates and
Mm.
whatnot, and it was also about DNA. It was also
Yeah.
about what to do with humans because uh, I mean to us because we're used to looking at it, human beings look like kind of the perfect organism in many ways. So when we're confronted with a being that kind of by our standards looks kind of ugly, right? I know that's a value judgment, but they just don't look like us. And, by our standards of what's good looking or not, some of these beings kind of look kind of hideous. So we
Mm.
form a value judgment about them. But so we have this image of ourselves. And I think that the Greeks, although a lot of the Greek mythology was tainted insofar as so much of the Greek culture back then and all cultures to this day were so heavily malignly influenced by the archontic forces, right? That whole Greek pantheon of, you know, Zeus and Hera and brother and sister, being mates and kings and queens and all this other stuff. But, what's interesting about that is the the DNA aspect, how when the gods would become enamored with some human female and then have progeny as a result, right? And then that human child, like Heracles in our example, or some other, or Perseus, or some other kind of half alien kind of being, they have all these powers and stuff because they inherited it, right? And
Mm.
so that's just through simple procreation, simple coitus, if you will. Now, how much more of that would be, uh, of that latent DNA potential, be there if it was genetically engineered? The Chinese are openly saying that they're genetically creating these, excuse me, these super soldier types, right? And we know that's been going on all along. That's the whole basis of the whole MyLab story, where
Yeah.
these people that have MyLab experiences, and I've known many, right? Many of them are gifted psychics to begin with, right?
Yeah, DARPA
Many,
came even out in 2012 and reported on super soldiers that do not need to eat and sleep for 72 hours, and to provide them with an interface so that in the field they can talk to each other telepathically. So, and my take always is when they come out with that information, they have had it for a long
they've
time.
had it for a long time. The neural transmitters implanted into people, subcutaneous transmitters, they've had that for a long time. That's just surface level stuff.
Mm.
So, they've had all this time now to perfect a lot of this, or as close to perfection as possible. So, we're all, and I would argue that, we talk about my labs on this planet. I would argue that the cosmos is full of my labs. They're not necessarily human as we understand it. They could be these other kind of ET races that have been essentially co-opted, essentially enslaved to do the bidding of these stronger, corrupt forces, right? So, we those of us who had my lab experiences are not the only ones that have been exploited in this fashion. Far from it. There are any number of beings that uh, have been exploited by reptilians, Draco, and Mantis and whatnot. This, like you pointed out, the slavery thing is just so widespread.
Mhm.
But getting back to the issue about the DNA, uh, whether it's through inbreeding, so these reptilian hybrid bloodlines can maintain their reptilian DNA, or uh, through genetic engineering, or through, I believe what happens also, a combination of genetic engineering and other factors, some human hybrids, and the countless walking around today, they have within their DNA the potential to do all kinds of stupendous things. But so many of them have been detuned from any understanding of themselves, who they are, where they're from, where humanity came from, what our real origins are, right? They're just caught up living out this day to day subsistence existence in a monetized debt system. They don't have the time to figure all this stuff out. They're not aware. They think that every once in a while they come up with a lucky guess, or they're a little intuitive. They don't have no idea of the potential they have within them,
Mm.
but someone else does. So some of these people will be accessed by ETs or by the military and utilized, where they can interface with certain types of ET technology, which only seems to work with of certain people of a certain DNA profile,
Mhm.
because that's what some of these ET races have done. They don't want any reptilian to jump on board their craft and like hijack it, so they make it so there's, we think in terms of AI as always being negative, but a lot of the more spiritually evolved, technologically higher dimensional advanced ET races utilize a form of AI that's not this all-encompassing exploitative kind of manipulative thing. That's, I mean, they have this happy symbiosis working with it, right? So they've got it set up so that only certain beings of a certain DNA profile, no matter what they may look like in their current incarnation, right, can activate and operate certain technology. And we saw this in the TV show Stargate SG-1,
Yeah.
where they talked about how, those with the ancient gene, right, were able to, like Colonel O'Neill of all people, right, he was able to access and activate all this technology and absorb massive amounts of knowledge and wisdom, downloaded into him, right. So yes, that is absolutely true. DNA is the currency of the universe, and with it comes extraordinary metaphysical powers that transcends time, space. I mean, literally, it's limitless. What we could do with DNA if we thoroughly understood it.
Yeah. You know what I wish? All these races, if they deem themselves to be benevolent, malevolent, I don't care. All of you, pack your bags and go. Empty your underground bases. Stop the electronic electromagnetic harassment from afar of this planet. And just leave us alone. Yeah. And I would love to see that, how the entire atmosphere changes on this planet. Not only the literal atmosphere, but I think the entire, if all that influence, that mind control, that electromagnetic manipulation, and the entire scheme of things, if all of that is gone, I would really love to see how it looks and feels like to be living here.
I would too, and I would. I would sense that many people would go back to a more pastoral existence because it's so unnatural to be in these big, ugly cities, in these concrete jungles. I think that more and more people would gravitate towards nature. More and more people would, have a and then develop a happy relationship with nature instead of one that requires us to chop everything down, burn everything up, and dig everything up. Right? That in itself is this Anunnaki kind of God pantheon mindset where, um, you like the different ET races are constantly mining. Like they're mining this asteroid, they're mining this world, they're mining this moon, and it's like that whole concept has been passed on to humans, and they're constantly mining, constantly tearing the earth up.
Mm.
And I'm not a vegan or a vegetarian, but I can understand how part of what these reptilian beings, the Anunnaki or whoever they may be, have done is they've they foisted a form of animal husbandry, for lack of a better term, on humans, where there seems to be a genetic link between cows, cattle, because there's almost a perfect blood match between bovine blood and human blood, which is very strange. And then you have that connection with animal mutilations, with aliens, and animal mutilations, and how it seems to be tied up with the human cloning process, right?
Mm-hmm.
That whole concept of animal mutilations and what have you. So, in a sense, if we have this genetic connection with cows, and people are caught up in this endless cycle of always eating cow meat, let's say, and I'm guilty of that too. And then you think of all the trauma that these cows have been subjected to in these mass.
Yeah, and that is
You know,
exactly why I do not eat meat or fish. Haven't done so for a long, long time. I'm so fed up with because what we are bitching about, yeah, sometimes, how the archons are looshing on us and blah, blah, blah.
yes,
We are doing the same thing.
they're the same thing. It's a madhouse. It
Mm,
is.
mm,
I mean, there were periods of my life when, you know, um, I went for 2-3 years pretty much as a vegetarian. You know what I mean? Um, but the point I was making was all the horror, all the trauma, all the angst that's exuded by these animals in that whole food chain process when they're being slaughtered and consumed. That gets not only does it get absorbed into the people eating it, but
yeah.
it gets projected out into the inner astral planes as really pissed off, angry thought forms, right?
Mm,
Like a whole exploited, uh, species of animal, sentient beings, and that's just one type. And so the point of relevance is that's one of the things the Anunnaki did for us. It says, okay, we're going to make you have this symbiotic, exploitative relationship with cows, with pigs, with goats, and all this other, kind of make you like us in a way, but you won't realize it. You see,
mm,
you won't. And what they've done now, and it's been going on for some time, and we've talked about this in previous shows, is what they do with the aborted fetal tissue
mm,
cells,
mm.
and they recycle them into vaccines. They turn up as these mystery flavor enhancers, right, in food, processed food. So they're essentially turning people into cannibals
Yeah.
without their knowing it. So, and I think that because of the reptilian DNA, and we see in extremis an aspect of this with these cults and the cannibalism and all that, and also some of these traditional cannibalistic cultures in New Guinea, Africa, and other places, right, where they, this is not a cultural taboo, and Native Americans and some Native Americans, like some of the Iroquois Confederacy tribes. But the point of relevance is just as we have like receptors for DMT or cannabinoids or opioids in our brain, like some genetic engineer thought it'd be a good idea. Well, they might need these, or we might need these when we're manipulating them. I think that there's this, because of the reptilian genetic, we were talking about genetics earlier, genetic engineering overlay, a lot of people have not only a predilection and desire for meat, but within their genetic memory, and because of the reptilian genetic influence, there is a cannibalistic element which they may not be aware of. See what I mean?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people that are alien abductees, and especially reptilian abductees, they have experiences in the astral dreamscape where, and probably not even always in the astral dreamscape, where they're made or compelled or manipulated or tricked into ingesting blood, ingesting meat, right, of some form. They don't really know what kind of meat. But then they, in the dream, let's call it, they drink it or they eat it, and then they wind up feeling really sick and nauseous the next day, right? And if that's what happens to your average quote unquote run of the mill abductee, what about these really hybridized people like Jeffrey Dahmer or something like them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So where they just wake up in the morning, not nauseated, but like wanting to have blood, you know what I mean? Because it's genetically been imbued into them. They're they're more reptilian than the average person. So what if on a grander scale, through these vaccines, through the flavor enhancers and other means, they're gradually turning people cannibalistic without their knowing, which opens them up to even more and more entity possession. You see what I mean? Because I think with the veils between worlds becoming more porous and hadron and all this other stuff going on, I think we're already seeing a level of possession and entity, malign entity influence that we've never seen this level before. And even Orthodox type of Christian missionaries, exorcists, what have you, are saying that they're seeing more cases of demonic possession
Mm-hmm.
now than ever before. So I think it's a sign of the times, really.
Yeah. That was a fantastic conversation. I thank you so much for doing this.
Sorry if I went off script. If I went off script a little bit, I probably just
No,
gabbed about all this
that's
stuff.
okay. You know, you should be able as a guest to develop your thoughts freely without being interrupted every two sentences, and yeah, that
Well,
is
thank
how
you.
that is how I see my job as an interviewer, and I will allow time to just so that it can play out. That's it.
Thank you, Judith. I really appreciate it.
So yeah, interesting times. I have to say I always end my day on a funny note. What I do is the other day, for instance, I watched a Peter Sellers movie. It's called The Party, where he plays an Indian actor, and
Yeah.
and at the end of the day, the entire house is demolished, and it starts out with the. I laughed so hard. It was really, really fun to see that again. And I always make sure that I end my day on even a silly note. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, because that'll be the vibe and the resonance we bring with us into the astral dreamscape. So, and also, it just shows how much things have changed. Because nowadays, everyone will be screaming about how racist, Peter Sellers was for playing the part. But I know the character that you're talking about, and that's like, I love those old Peter Sellers movies. I thought they were hilarious, and
Yeah.
again, it brings me back to a time when, I guess, a more innocent age for me. When I can really not be subjected to all this stuff and have to, be preoccupied at times with thinking about it. So thank you for reminding me about that. I'll see if I can dig up some of those old movies.
Yeah, and during when the world was celebrating Christmas, because I don't care about Christmas, not one iota. I couldn't care less if it exists or not. And during that time, I watched all the Doris Day movies, Cary Grant, blah 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 blah, and it was delightful, I have to say, and it always left me in a good mood.
I agree.
So, James, thank you so much for coming and being with us today, and all the best for your show and your website. Yeah, everything will be linked below. You want to say something?
Yeah, and definitely we'll have you back on my show again sometime. And I always welcome an opportunity to talk with you, Judith. It's always I always get a real kick out of it. So thanks once again for having me on.
Okay, so that was it, guys. Night Flight for today with the wonderful James Bartley. Stay safe from tyranny and stay sound out there. Enjoy your life. Bye-bye.